MT here, guys, and we're playing an audiobook. And this is not a true story, but it could have been. And it's about the Civil War. It's a movie in your mind. And let's start playing it. And now.
Graphic audio. A movie in your mind.
Morgan's coming! Morgan's coming!
Ty Matson hustled toward the livery barn. Boone Jordan, a Mexican war veteran and the calmest man in all of Elizabethtown, Kentucky, stepped from the stall he had been mucking. Mr. Jordan's peg leg stirred a tiny cloud of dust on the floor of the livery stable.
Is he in sight yet?
Ty halted before the livery owner.
No. They say he may pass through here tomorrow or the next day.
And not to disappoint you, lad, but I think Morgan's main column won't attack Elizabethtown. Scouting party or foraging detail may come nosing around, but not the main column.
How can you be so sure?
Boone leaned on his pitchfork.
Morgan will follow the road through Lebanon and Bardstown, even if it means a fight with what Union bluebellies are blocking his path. It's the shortest route to the Ohio River. He's aiming to cross the Ohio at Brandenburg.
A heap of folks are saying he'll attack Louisville or Elizabethtown.
Nah. If he captured a city the size of Louisville, he couldn't hold it. Federal forces are after him like bees swarming on honey, and they'd surround him in a day or two. He'd lose his whole command. And Elizabethtown is out of his way now. He has no interest in burning the L&N trestles at Muldrow Hill again. He has bigger game in mind. He means to invade Indiana and Ohio and raise Hobbs as long as he can before recrossing the river.
I guess that makes sense, but how could you know what General Morgan's real plan is, Mr. Jordan?
Well, your father told me.
My father lives in Texas. He's been there all my life. How would he know what's happening in Kentucky?
Boone stood his pitchfork against the wall of the stall he was cleaning.
Come back to the tack room with me, Ty. You're old enough and have a right to the true story of Owen Matson.
Ty followed close to Boone, heart pounding. Maybe he would finally learn something about his father, besides what little his grandmother had told him. How his father had gone off to fight in the Mexican War, leaving behind Ty's pregnant mother, who had died giving birth to him. According to his grandmother, his father had chosen to remain in Texas after the war ended and had never attempted to contact his grandparents after that fatal decision. Ty never ceased wondering why his father had abandoned him. Graphic Audio presents American Civil War I, Raiding with Morgan, by Jim R. Woolard. Narrated by Terence Aselford, with performances by Michael John Casey, Eric Messner, Eric Singdalson, James Konichek, Bradley Smith, Terence Aselford, Tim Carlin, Joe Brack, Jacob Ye, Maggie Donnelly, Christopher Davenport, Jonathan Church, Matthew Bassett, Jonathan Watkins, Andy Brownstein, Scott McCormick, Scott Graham, Nick DePinto, and Nora Ashrati. American Civil War I, Raiding with Morgan. The oversized tack room smelled of leather, horsehair, and neatsfoot oil. Saddles rested on sawhorses and bridles. Harness and headgear hung from wall pegs. A cast-iron stove occupied the wall opposite the doorway. Two ladder-back chairs flanked the small wooden table where Old Joe and Mr. Jordan ate their meals and enjoyed their evening ration of corn liquor behind closed doors, what with Elizabethtown being a strict Baptist community.
Have a seat, lad.
Pivoting on his peg leg, the livery owner dropped into the chair across from Ty.
Well, I suppose I better start at the beginning. Your father and I went off to Texas in 1846. We enlisted at Lexington, Kentucky in John Hunt Morgan's company. Morgan was a captain then. Once the tussle with Mexico was finished, your father and I decided to settle in Texas. It may sound cruel and cold to you, but your father heard your mother had died during childbirth. He loved her something awful, and It sapped the will out of him for months.
Did Father know I survived?
Don't get impatient with me, lad.
I'm sorry, Mr. Jordan.
Owen knew you survived. Enoch and your father had a falling out before he left Kentucky. But your grandmother defied his orders and wrote your father and told him.
Then Father didn't want me, to claim me for his son.
Hear me out, lad. Now, don't judge your father too harshly until you do, all right?
Ty nodded and bit his lip to make sure he remained silent. He might not like what he was about to be told, but he wouldn't bawl like a child and disgrace himself. He was nearly 17 years of age, too old to break into tears in front of Mr. Jordan.
Owen mourned your mother for years. He talked of returning to Kentucky, and then we joined the Rangers so as not to starve, and we were soon chasing Comanche warriors over most of Texas. Years went by, and your father started talking of someday owning a ranch of his own. He hardly mentioned Kentucky. I think so much time slipped away, your father was plumb embarrassed that he ducked his fatherly duties.
Boone leaned back in his chair. His gaze was fixed on Ty's face.
If he came home, he'd have to deal with your grandfather. Now, Owen fears nothing. He saved my life when we were caught in that Comanche ambush at Blue Springs. Well, sure, I lost part of a leg, but I'm still waking to daylight. But what Owen didn't want was a brawl with your grandfather. Enoch objected to his marrying your mother. Now, your grandmother told Owen in her letter that your grandfather had disowned him, had legally denied him his rightful inheritance, and had himself appointed your guardian by the Elizabethtown courts. If Owen ever set foot on Matson property again, your grandfather vowed he'd shoot him.
Boone Jordan studied Ty's shocked expression.
I wager you know nothing about Owen being disowned, the guardianship, or your grandfather's threat, do you?
No, sir.
Ty's grandmother, Victoria, seldom went against the wishes of her husband. Her single letter to Ty's father constituted a lifetime of rebellion in the strict household of Enoch Matson.
How'd you find all this out, Mr. Jordan? Did my father tell you while you were in Texas together, or did he write you?
No, he told me in person.
What?
Owen is riding with General Morgan's cavalry right now, today. He joined the general in Tennessee a year ago June and was assigned to the general's personal staff. I wrote your father after I returned to Elizabethtown. That's how he knew I owned this livery stable. Owen sought me out after General Morgan's men captured Elizabethtown last Christmas.
Did he want to see me?
Of course he did. He just didn't dare show himself at your grandfather's door in anything other than a blue uniform. An ardent Union sympathizer like your grandfather would have started shooting the minute he saw a Confederate cavalryman in his barnyard, son or no son. You deal with Enoch Matson, you best walk the same path or suffer the consequences.
You're right, Mr. Jordan. Grandfather had the neighbors armed and ready. Lucky for us, Morgan's men didn't come north of town and pester us.
That wasn't luck. It was your father's doing. He asked General Morgan for orders that the home and property of Enoch Matson was not to be looted or burned. And the general thinks enough of Owen, he issued such orders.
So even though grandfather despises him, father protected him?
Not exactly. It was more that he was preserving the Matson acres and its thoroughbred horses for his son, the future heir. He did it for you.
An entirely different picture of his father was rapidly forming in Ty's mind, and suddenly the most imperative need in his whole existence was to meet his father face to face, and he couldn't wait until the war was over. It was certainly dangerous, as blue and gray soldiers and marauders, with no allegiance to either side, roamed the Kentucky countryside. No sane soul dared travel afoot and unarmed. It was doubly risky to travel alone.
You want to go meet your father, don't you, lad?
Yes, sir, more than I want to breathe. But I can't go up hunting without a horse and gun. Grandfather won't give them to me willingly, and I can't rightly steal from him.
Boone smiled.
Damned, you are Owen Manson's son, all right. He can't steal from others even if he's starving. Well, young fella, maybe you should have a say as to what your future will be. You'll be 18 in a few days. Your grandfather can't keep you out of the Blue Belly Army once you reach the draft age of 18 without breaking the law of the land. We both know he won't do that. If you're grown enough to don a uniform and tote a rifle, then you're old enough to decide which side you want to fight with. But I can help you there. Follow me.
The livery owner skirted the stove. He pulled a wooden crate from behind it.
Grab the other end. Help me slide this crate over by the table.
Full of unbounded curiosity, Ty watched as Mr. Jordan unbuckled the crate's leather straps and lifted its lid.
Been a while since I poked around in here, but I believe I have everything you'll need.
First out of the crate was a wide-brimmed hat, with the right side pinned to the crown by a brass star. Ty's astonishment grew the deeper Boone dug. A pair of leather jack boots, which tied above the knee, followed the hat. Next out was a holstered revolver with waist belt, a leather shoulder bag, a pair of woolen trousers, and finally, a cotton shield shirt.
I judge you now to be about the size I was then. This should all fit okay.
Is this your gear from your time in Texas, Mr. Jordan?
Yep, this is Ranger garb. Gano's Brigade of Texas Cavalry rides with General Morgan. You meet up with Morgan's column, you'll be a dead ringer for those crazy Texans.
Boone lifted the revolver and drew the weapon from the cavalry holster.
Now this is the most important thing on the table. You recognize it, don't you? I owned a matching pair of 1858 Remingtons. I sold your grandfather the other revolver last summer. It's the pistol he taught you to shoot with. Enoch bragged this winter how accurate you become at target practice. And compliments from Enoch Matson are as scarce as a barn cat with 5 legs and cow horns.
Boone turned a serious look to the young man.
Lad, now I'm not one for preaching or sticking to the rules, but let me share the cardinal rules of the Rangers with you. Unless it's orders from a senior officer, never let anyone, under any circumstances, separate you from your weapon. Part with your gun, and you're as good as dead. Many a Ranger is alive because he stuck to that training. Will you promise me that?
At Ty's nod, Boone Jordan laid the revolver aside and rapped the table with his knuckles.
All right. Well, let's mosey out to the stock pen. You can't meet up with Morgan's cavalry afoot. Those Texas rowdies would laugh you clean out of Kentucky.
There was a single horse in the stock pen. That animal was a big, rangy, pure gray gelding, except for a large splotch of black on his left cheek.
Now, Reb ain't fancy like those Denmark thoroughbreds your grandfather and General Morgan swear by. Reb was crossbred. That accounts for the long face, wide forehead, and big ears. What counts is he's deep in the chest, long a hip, and strong in the pasterns. Plus, he's gun broke and will jump a fence or hedgerow fast. He's the kind of animal your father and I sought with the Rangers when we had to ride miles each day.
Ty clutched the top rail of the stock pen with both hands, hard enough to splinter wood, and pretended he was studying Reb. Boone Jordan saw Ty's white-knuckled grip on the top rail and the hard knot at the hinge of his jaw.
It's a big decision, lad. You're the only one who can make it.
If I abandon my grandfather without any warning, I'm most likely to be disowned like my dad. If I stay, I can't avoid the draft into the Blue Belly Army my father is fighting against. Do you believe I can find my father on my own, Mr. Jordan?
Yes, I do, lad. You're a skilled rider. You can shoot, and you've traveled the road from Elizabethtown to Brandenburg on horse buying trips with your grandfather.
How soon should I leave?
Right now, lad. Sun will be down shortly. If General Morgan's in Lebanon today, he'll be in Bardstown tomorrow and Brandenburg the next morning. You need to make sure you join his column on the Brandenburg Road near Garnetsville. The meadows along the road there are large enough for his night camp. You'll need to ride straight through the night or risk being caught between Morgan's column and the Bluebellies pursuing him. I don't want you shot dead or starving in a federal prison.
I couldn't forgive myself if I didn't try to find him. Don't know if he'll be as glad to see me, but I'll chance it for just one look at him.
Good. I'll return your wagon and horse in the morning and tell Enoch where you've gone. And he'll be furious, but it'll be too late for him to stop you. Come inside, lad. We need to figure out the best way for you to leave town.
In the tack room, Boone fired a coal oil lantern and separated the woolen trousers and shield shirt from the other items on the wooden table.
Put those on, lad. They won't attract undue attention.
While Ty changed clothes, Boone stuffed the jack boots, spurs, holstered revolver, and wide-brimmed hat into a 100-pound hemp grain sack. He passed the leather shoulder bag to Ty.
This bag won't attract much attention either. In it you'll find balls, percussion caps, a powder flask, and extra cylinders for the Remington. The bag is as valuable as your revolver. Don't take it off, even to sleep. Once you're well past Enoch's Gate, you can finish changing yourself into a Texan.
Boone selected a Mexican saddle with double cinches and a bridle from the livery gear lining the far wall of the tack room and dropped them at the gate of the nearest stall.
Lead Reb inside and saddle him. Talk soft and easy, and he'll follow you like a child. Temperamental, he's not. I'll sack up a cache of grub for you.
The lanterns were fired and hanging at the front entryway of the stable, providing Ty with enough light to work by in the growing dusk. Reb was the docile animal Boone described. Ty had him saddled when Boone Jordan emerged from the tack room with a hemp bag in each hand. Boone headed for the street and stopped just inside the livery's lit doorway.
General Judah led his cavalry on a wild goose chase to Leachfield, thinking Morgan would circle to the west without crossing the Ohio. That leaves a detail here in town and a few commissary wagons with the bluebellies assigned to them along the North Road. You drove past them in your wagon coming to town. If they stop you, say your wagon broke down and you borrowed a horse from the livery to take home the supplies your grandfather ordered tonight, so he won't be angry with you. You best be going, lad. If you hear riders approaching from ahead or from behind you, abandon the road and hide as best you can. Don't trust anyone, man or woman, until you find Morgan's column. When you hear a challenge from a sentry in Morgan's unit, yell out that you're Owen Matson's son. Given how you'll be dressed, he'll have his sergeant take you to it.
Ty followed Boone into the street and mounted Reb. The livery owner tied the hemp bags together with a leather cord and slung them over Reb's withers.
How will I recognize my father, Mr. Jordan?
No different than looking in a mirror, lad. You spy a man your size, with ox-yoke shoulders, red hair, green eyes, mouthful of white teeth, and voice deep as a well, you found your father.
Ty shook the hand Boone Jordan offered.
Thanks for everything, Mr. Jordan.
My pleasure, lad. My pleasure.
Ty reined Reb toward the Brandenburg Road. Fearing he'd lose his nerve at the last second, Ty didn't turn to wave goodbye. By roughly 9 o'clock, the heart-wrenching sight loomed at the roadside, the archway and gate of the Matson estate. He went past the padlocked gate without slackening Reb's pace. He'd made his decision, and there was no turning back. Nonetheless, his heart was burdened with the knowledge that he'd willingly closed the door on the past he'd known since birth for a future that could put him in great danger with the prospect he might be felled by a bluebelly bullet. Soon after passing the estate, Ty skirted a small detachment of Union soldiers who had taken a post outside of town. Around midnight, he halted Reb long enough to don the balance of his new Texas clothes and strap the Remington about his waist. The change made him more confident of facing whatever might pop up the balance of the night and beyond. He wasn't a trained soldier, but flight was no longer his only means of defense. He rummaged inside one of Boone Jordan's feed sacks and found cloth-wrapped cold-fried chicken and soft bread. He ate a large portion of each on the move. With the first peak of daylight over the eastern horizon, the deep woods fell away, and Ty made out farmhouses, barns, outbuildings, most back from the road a piece, and the shadowy contours of planted fields and pastures. Ty heard the lowing of cows waiting to be milked. He gigged Reb into a trot. Soon, lamps shone in upstairs and kitchen windows, and smoke drifted from chimneys. The Kentucky countryside was awakening at a rapid clip. Ty was fast approaching Buck Grove, a hamlet consisting of 4 houses, a grist mill, crossroads store, small wayside tavern, and a blacksmith shop. The only person Ty saw on Buck Grove's single street was a small boy playing with a hoop in a side yard. Not wanting to draw attention to himself, Ty had Reb gallop full tilt. He was through the small hamlet and beyond before a single adult citizen realized he and his mount had come and gone without a trace, other than the drum of hoofbeats. A while later, he was beginning to feel drowsy after a solid night in the saddle and started casting about for a daytime hideaway. He kept shaking his head to ward off his sleepiness. To keep his mind and hands occupied, he ate more chicken and bread. The road dropped into a small valley before climbing a sizable hill. Hoofbeats on the far rise of the hill snapped Ty's head up. One horse did not present a substantial threat. A large number was to be avoided until he'd identified who rode them, and maybe even then. With unfenced woodland at Ty's right flank and open fields on his left, he gigged Reb amongst trees with trunks bigger around than flour barrels. An open glade filled with tall saplings loomed. Ty halted Reb in the towering trunks just beyond the glade. He couldn't see the Garnetsville Road from the saddle, and, satisfied the gelding was hidden well, he dismounted, drove his Remington, and angled back toward the dusty thoroughfare on foot. The riders...
Alright guys, this is going to get kind of like going, like guns blazing, like it's going to be precise with the noises of firearms. So if you guys don't like that, I'll skip this part. And hopefully, if you do, stay tuned. It's about to get very noisy and loud of gunshots. And it's pretty accurate in, like, it describes blood and that. So if you guys don't like that, skip this part and come in later. Alright, here's the list.
Crested the hill to the north. Ty scrambled forward in a crouch, counting on the intervening trees to shield him until proper cover presented itself. Spying an open section of the Garnetsville Road, he plucked his hat from his head and went to ground behind the leafy brush that plugged the gaps between the tree butts. He carefully parted branches with his hand, and sure enough, the oncoming horseman would pass in plain sight without being aware of his presence. The armed horsemen were nothing like the organized cavalry Ty had either read or heard about. Not a single piece of their apparel, hat, or weapon matched. Ragged beards and untrimmed hair proliferated. None appeared to have washed clothes or body in some time. He couldn't imagine a more motley bunch of combatants. The bunch of them were riding nonchalantly, slugging liquor from clay-fired jugs. These ragamuffins were classic examples of the irregulars, misfits and miscreants who bore no allegiance to either the Yankee or Confederate flag and preyed on the weak and defenseless. Ty counted 11 riders. Halt! The irregulars halted smack in front of him. Two of the ragamuffins stood in their stirrups and stared into the woods. Gripping the butt of his Remington with all his might, Ty clamped his jaw so tight that his teeth hurt. He knew that if he fled, the irregulars would spot him and make quick work of him.
Huh. Nothing. Move out!
The irregulars lifted their assorted weapons and trotted south, stirring a thin veil of dust behind them. Ty wormed his backside against a rough-barked tree and relaxed. Since he had left Elizabethtown, his luck defied belief. The careless Yankees had let him slip by without a challenge. Buck Grove had been asleep. He'd heard approaching horses, not yet in sight, soon enough to take cover in a most convenient stand of timber with sufficient cover. Whether that kind of good fortune could continue until he rendezvoused with General Morgan and his raiders was still to be seen. Despite the slight breeze that rustled tree leaves, he heard what he'd missed before in all the excitement. Water purling deeper in the forest. Still wary, he hitched his feet under him, hiked to where he'd hidden Reb, and sought the source of that refreshing sound. The 3-foot-wide stream passed over a solid limestone bottom, making for clear drinking water. Reb needed no invitation. A sharp tug of the head freed his reins, and the big gray dropped his muzzle to drink. With a quick, cursory look upstream and down, a dry-tongued Ty laid his hat on the bank and flopped on his belly to follow suit. The coldness of the water numbed his lips and throat with the first swallow. After drinking his fill and sitting back to settle himself, Ty scooped up his hat and Reb's reins, looped the reins over the gelding's head, then mounted. Without saying a word, he turned the gray, pointed him toward the Garnetsville Road, and rode into the shielding trees. Once clear of the woods, he urged Reb into a trot. He took time, then and there, to thank the Lord for allowing Lady Luck to share his saddle.
Halt! Or be shot from the saddle!
Ty brought Reb to a standstill with a light squeeze of the reins. The Texas drawl soothed nerves strung to the breaking point after hours of hiding from irate locals pursuing the marauding irregulars, a mail carrier, a doctor in a buggy, and 2 Union Army freight wagons. But all that lonely, stealthy riding was behind him. He'd found General Morgan's raiders.
What's the password?
At close range, the road was darker than the backside of a fastened belt. Ty could not spot the sentry stationed in a copse of oak trees. Ahead, a mile up the road, he made out what seemed 1,000 flickering campfires. It was the smell of wood smoke on the evening breeze that had kept him riding after sunset.
Whoever you are, you best speak up. I'm short on patience.
Ty quickly remembered Boone Jordan's instructions.
My name is Ty Matson. I'm Owen Matson's son. He's assigned to General Morgan's staff. I'm here to join him and fight the Yankees.
By damn, that's a new one, huh, Frank? What do you think we should do with him?
Frank stepped from the trees.
Forget that he don't know the password, Harvey. He ain't dressed like no Yankee spy. He's outfitted like you and those hot-headed Texas braggarts and Gunno's brigade. Any which ways, we don't want a chance of upsetting Captain Matson. Let's escort him to Lieutenant Shannon.
I'll take that pistol, Mr. Ty Matson.
I'd prefer to keep it. Father trained me never to hand over my weapon, no matter the circumstance. He'd have my hide.
A brassy young sprout, isn't he?
Yep, but that clinches it for me. That's what Captain Matson preaches when he drills us. Step down, Mr. Ty Matson. You can bring your horse. You don't mind, we'll amble along behind you. Walsh and Parsons, you stay put. Harvey and I will risk a ton lashing for not disarming him. If you've lied to us, Sprout, this here rifle barrel of mine is going to raise a tall knot behind your ear. You first, Mr. Ty Matson.
When they reached the fringe of Morgan's camp, the sentry named Frank took the lead. They wound through countless fires, their passage attracting little attention. Ty studied each mess as they went by. Unlike the spanking bluebelly uniforms with shiny brass buttons he had observed in Elizabethtown, the most common uniform for General Morgan's troopers was a nondescript, grimy gray. He saw troopers in ankle-length dusters, frock coats favored by gentlemen, and short jackets. A greater number had no coat whatsoever. Weaponry of different calibers and loads ranged from pistols and rifled muskets to shotguns. Though they were mounted cavalry, few troopers possessed swords. Beautifully proportioned thoroughbreds and saddle horses of different breeds grazed in the Garnetsville meadows, with a few grass-fed work animals wide as barn doors. Morgan's fast-moving riders couldn't always be choosy. If you could saddle it, you'd best ride it or risk being left behind. The ages of the supposedly seasoned cavalrymen fascinated Ty the most. While officers tended to be older, into their late 20s and 30s, the bulk of the troopers weren't much older than he was. A few actually appeared younger. Learning that, he felt a little less out of place. The smell of roasting meat and pole bread had Ty's stomach growling. He'd polished off the cold chicken and hardtack biscuits provided by Boone Jordan that morning, devouring a 4-day supply in 2. It was a mistake he wouldn't repeat, for he was in no position to beg for food and didn't know when he would eat next. Ty's destination was the largest house on Garnetsville's single main street. Troopers jammed the porch and front yard of the Rayner home, a white-painted, 2-story frame dwelling. Moving bodies passed each other behind parlor windows. Mounted messengers came and went in rapid succession. 5 Morgan troopers were seated around the fire in the woodlot on the right side of the house.
Sergeant Lockhart reporting to Lieutenant Shannon.
A trooper on the near side of the fire stood in response.
State your business, Sergeant Lockhart.
Lieutenant Shannon, I'm fetching a squirt we captured on the South Road, sir.
At first, Lieutenant Shannon was a shadow against the light of the flames. When he came forward, Ty made him out by moonlight and the yellow glow spilling from the windows of General Morgan's temporary headquarters. The bareheaded lieutenant was broad-shouldered, with wavy black hair and midnight eyes. His Texas garb and scorched face bespoke a horseman who had spent considerable years where the blazing sun threatened to burn holes in the ground. Huge Lamar revolvers adorned both his hips. Those pistols, the intense midnight eyes, and the slight swagger in the lieutenant's stride convinced Ty that Shannon was a dangerous, no-nonsense soldier capable of swift, forceful action.
Sorry guys, I had to interrupt this, but me and Porus, if you know he's one of the YouTubers, we're trying to make these YouTube videos on Battlefront 2 or the first one, and he's going to be like Darth Vader, the really strong guys. I'm always going to be the weakest guy and the stupidest guy. So, I just have to say that. And one of my videos, and this is the one. Well, now back to the audio book.
Sergeant Lockhart, this captive is a stranger in our camp and he's armed. Please explain your violation of brigade regulations.
Sergeant Lockhart shuffled his feet.
Sir, he's no Yankee. He's dressed like you. He says he's Ty Matson, Captain Matson's son. He told us Captain Matson trained him not to surrender his weapon or he'd be punished. That's the same thing the captain pounds us at drill. Sorry, sir, but I believe him.
We'll discuss this matter at length later this evening, Sergeant, and determine if punishment is warranted. You may return to your post.
Yes, sir.
Once Lockhart walked away, Shannon turned his attention to Ty.
What should we do with you, Sprout? Maybe you're Captain Matson's son, and maybe you're not. He's never mentioned a son, which seems mighty strange if you ask me. The captain is not in camp to vouch for you. He's at Brandenburg with 10th Kentucky, securing boats for our crossing of the Ohio. It'd be best for both of us if I follow regulations. Hand over that revolver. We'll put you in manacles. You can ride in a commissary wagon until we reach Brandenburg.
Ty had no desire to part with Reb and his Remington and be imprisoned until tomorrow morning or longer. Yet he was bound there unless a superior officer intervened. Grandfather Matson's favorite dictum, "Don't swim the stream when there's a bridge handy," seemed the best course to pursue. Ty knew of only one senior officer who could rescind Lieutenant Shannon's orders.
General Morgan will vouch for me. He will he? Have you ever met the general in person? He even so much as laid an eye on you?
No, sir. General Morgan has been a friend of my father since the Mexican War. I'm certain my father mentioned me to him.
Lieutenant Shannon's sun-scorched face leaned within an inch of Ty's nose. Silent seconds ticked away. The lieutenant straightened.
All right. General Morgan will decide whether or not you're to be treated as a prisoner. Now, I won't risk insulting Owen Matson by refusing his would-be son. Just remember, General Morgan is busy issuing orders for a midnight march. His subordinates may turn us away. If that happens, it's a wagon bed for you. Understood?
Ty nodded. Lieutenant Shannon extended a hand.
I'll have that pistol in the meantime. I don't disobey orders. Private Hargrove, tend to this lad's horse.
Lieutenant Shannon slid Ty's Remington behind his silver-buckled belt.
Follow me, Mr. Tetson.
Wending his way through the crowd occupying the porch of the Rayner home, Lieutenant Shannon managed to squeeze Ty through the front door. Inside, the parlor reeked of dried sweat, horsehair, cigar smoke, and coal oil fumes. Both Ty and Lieutenant Shannon were taller than almost all of the gathered troopers. Their height gave them a clear view of what held the troopers' attention. A rectangular table blocked the doorway accessing the kitchen, and behind it sat General John Hunt Morgan. Ty couldn't help staring. He had heard and read of General John Hunt Morgan's daring raids behind Union lines, his spectacular victories over superior forces, his numerous narrow escapes from pursuing Bluebelly cavalry, infantry, and militia. But the significance of those feats paled upon sighting the general in the flesh. General John Hunt Morgan was strikingly handsome and dressed in a civilian suit of black broadcloth. A black hat, right side pinned up by golden wreath-around-a-tree embroidery, rested on the table at his elbow. His hands were small and white for a cavalryman. He had a fair complexion, and his mustache and imperial beard were finely trimmed. Dark auburn hair framed his high forehead. His keen gray-blue eyes sparkled with mirth, and the smile that greeted those stepping before him to report and receive orders displayed perfect white teeth. In a makeshift war room, ripe with tension and tiptoe hurry, he affected a casual air that relaxed his junior officers and their subordinates. Yet he kept the proceedings moving at a steady, decisive pace. Ty doubted that General Morgan would have time to bother with him. Preparing for a midnight march after a full day in the saddle was exhausting enough without adding the burden of a minor affair to his plate, one that could wait until morning. Fortunately, Lieutenant Shannon didn't share his doubts. The lieutenant waved one of his huge revolvers back and forth above his head. A bespectacled, blond-bearded lieutenant, the sleeves of his zouave jacket studded with bright coral buttons, was bent over a mound of papers at the end of General Morgan's table. Seeing the waving revolver and recognizing Lieutenant Shannon, he pointed to the corner of the room directly behind him. Lieutenant Shannon pushed into the crowd.
Come on. We'll have our audience with General Morgan. Lieutenant Hardesty is Morgan's adjutant. He has his ear.
Once key orders were issued, an astonished Ty watched the Rayner's parlor empty in less than a half hour, except for the General, Lieutenant Hardesty, and General Morgan's grizzled black servant, Old Box, lingering with a last pot of coffee for his master. Lieutenant Hardesty signed a concluding document and stored his steel pen and capped ink vial in a leather case. He signaled to Lieutenant Shannon and Ty.
Please, state your business, Lieutenant.
We need to talk briefly with General Morgan, sir.
Is it really important, Lieutenant? Can it wait until the General gets some much-needed sleep?
It's a personal matter that involves Captain Matson.
The mention of Captain Matson's name alerted General Morgan, who placed his coffee cup on the table and glanced over his shoulder.
Captain Owen Matson, is it? Come around here where I can speak with you, Lieutenant.
Ty's hopes soared. Either his father was a sincere friend of the General's, or was held in utmost esteem as a member of the General's personal staff. Ty's knees were shaking something awful, and Ty discovered that standing before a great military leader was very intimidating, if not downright frightening.
Well, out with it, Lieutenant, or we'll be in the saddle again without any rest tonight.
My announcement, guys. I'm just only going to do one CD a day. So I'm not going to actually do the whole entire thing. There's 5. And I have to work, and I just don't have enough time. And I usually just start out at 10. But, I forgot what I was about to say. Well, I think that's it. Back to the audiobook.
Sir, we captured this sprout on the South Road. He claims he's Captain Matson's son. While he's never met you in person, he says you know of him and can vouch for him.
General Morgan frowned.
No, I don't know of him. Owen has never acknowledged having a son.
Ty's heart sank, but General Morgan's keen blue-gray eyes locked on Ty.
But with that crazy red hair and green eyes, he could be Owen's offspring. What's your assessment, Sergeant?
Sir, he certainly has Captain Matson's hair and eyes, and he's dressed like the rest of us Texans fighting with you. Might interest you that he talked the sentries into keeping his pistol.
Are you that clever, young man? Or are sentries so lacking in training and good judgment?
Sir, I told them Father trained me to never relinquish my weapon. Sergeant Lockhart reminded the other sentries that Captain Matson preached just that during drill, and they let me keep my weapon.
General Morgan smiled.
And given Owen's zeal for training and his reputation, I can imagine that happening. Don't be too hard on the sentries, Lieutenant. We'll arrive in Brandenburg just after daylight. I'm placing this young man in your custody. He may have use of his horse, but not his revolver. If he is Owen's son, it'll be interesting to observe how well he follows in his father's footsteps. He has some mighty big boots to fill. Mighty big. Dismissed, Lieutenant.
By mid-morning the next day, Ty Matson was miserable. Except for a few minutes after midnight on the evening he departed Elizabethtown, and a brief respite following his audience with General Morgan, and a hasty meal late yesterday evening, he hadn't slept a wink in 60-plus hours. Every solitary part of his body screamed for rest and sleep. Even worse, throughout the night he rode at the tail end of the column with Lieutenant Shannon and the rear guard.
Alright guys, so if you don't like violence and gun bullets, blazing and it's really loud, this is the part where you want to skip and gets very realistic. So if you guys served in the army or anything and you don't like this, I won't watch this, listen to this part. So skip this part and it will get better. Trust me. If you guys want to stick to this, it's really fascinating and it's kind of neat how the guys made all the gun noises, and it sounds pretty realistic. There you go.
The dust churned up by 8,000 odd hoofs filled the air with a thick, stifling dirt fog, which filled his ears, nose, and eyes. The dust covered his hat and shoulders and crept inside his shirt. He vowed he would acquire a bandana before he swallowed another morsel of food. The length of Ty's ride since Elizabethtown added to his discomfort. He'd never spent more than an entire morning in the saddle. The friction between his woolen trousers and saddle leather galled his thighs and spawned blisters on his hindquarters. He marveled that General Morgan's troopers spent day after day in the saddle. Being new to the rapidly changing nature of a military campaign, Ty had no inkling how much his tiredness and discomfort would be rendered inconsequential when they crested the steep hill overlooking Brandenburg. Ty had known from early childhood that he was gifted with exceptional eyesight. He possessed the ability to discern at great distances and in great detail things that were fuzzy and indistinguishable to others. The events unfolding below his perch on Brandenburg Hill thrilled him to the bone. The hoof-churned road beneath them descended sharply into the cluster of buildings and homes bunched at the waterfront. At the bottom of the town wharf, the 1,000-yard-wide muddy current of the high-running Ohio stretched east and west for miles. Across the river loomed the immediate objective of General Morgan's army, the lush shore of Indiana, punctuated by farmhouses with orange haystacks in golden fields and swatches of trees and underbrush, which were light green along the shore and dark green on the overlooking ridge. Ty spotted troopers on the Indiana bank, but no horses. The dismounted troopers were hurriedly taking cover in the nearest stand of trees. On the near bank, moored at the Brandenburg Wharf, was a packet steamboat, John B. McCombs, painted on a sign atop its wheelhouse, and a smaller steamboat, the Alice Dean, both with stilled paddles. Their gangplanks were empty. Neither cavalrymen nor horses were being loaded. The troopers had sought cover with their mounts behind town buildings and in the woods bordering Brandenburg. Ty tensed in the saddle. He'd never witnessed armies firing at each other and was pure green when it came to soldiering. He'd never been shot at, nor had he ever shot at another human being. A small ship steamed from upriver, black smoke spewing from its single stack. The snub-nosed craft was armored with iron plating. 3 howitzers protruded from embrasures cut through the iron plating and the heavy oak timbers beneath it. It was a Yankee gunboat, a bulldog whose bark preceded a dangerously sharp bite. A bluish-white funnel-shaped cloud sprung from the gunboat's left bow as she launched a shell that had troopers cringing as it hit and exploded in the middle of Brandenburg's main street.
So guys, actually this battleship is actually a real one. You can even search it up. And it chewed the Yankees out bad. Alright, I won't interrupt. No, I'll be quiet. Be quiet. I'll be quiet. Okay.
The gunboat then snapped a shell at scrambling troopers on the opposite bank. General Morgan's ferryboats were as vulnerable as sitting ducks to shell fire. One small gunboat was holding a 2,000-man army at bay, allowing Union forces in hot pursuit to gain ground and imperil the success of Morgan's mission.
Where are Captain Burns and our artillery?
Roundshot began pelting the gunboat, solid balls sending up tall geysers of water or thudding against its armor, shells bursting in flashes of red flame. The Confederate balls were coming from 2 12-pound howitzers positioned on a rising eminence along the Ohio, north of Brandenburg. Ty couldn't tell if Captain Burns's shells were inflicting any real damage on the snub-nosed ship, but they were forcing it to change course frequently, to present a moving target and interfering with the accuracy of its own howitzers. After an hour of exchanging fire, the Federal gunboat withdrew up the Ohio. Its retreat was akin to a dam bursting. Horse holders hustled to the wharf, and the ferrying of the horses belonging to the troopers on the Indiana shore commenced.
Sorry guys, I totally forgot about that language. I totally forgot that. I'm so sorry. It's been so long since I listened to this book. There is more swearing, I think. Hopefully there's not.
Lieutenant Shannon tracked the withdrawing gunboat with his telescope.
She was the Springfield.
Yes, sir. The letters on the bow were awfully small, and one of our rounds splintered the wood there, but you could read them if you looked close.
That was half a mile away. You can see that well, lad?
Yes, sir. I can see individual feathers on birds at 50 yards. A farmer is hiding in that big white barn across the river well over to your left. A peak of his straw hat is showing above the bottom sill of the hayloft door.
Lieutenant Shannon trained his telescope in that direction.
By damned, he's there, all right. Eyesight like yours, lad, could be plumb useful to General Morgan's scout company in advance guard. I'll make mention of you in my report.
The lieutenant's observation gave Ty great relief, as he had been racking his brain trying to determine how an untrained, inexperienced, would-be cavalryman might be accepted into the ranks of General Morgan's raiders. Maybe his keen eyesight was his ticket. An officer riding a Denmark thoroughbred joined Lieutenant Shannon and Ty.
Lieutenant, you may send word to the general that mounted Yankees are patrolling the Brandenburg Road at 500 yards. The sentries are guarding the road at 100 yards. Per his orders, they will remain in place until they are called to board the last ferry departing the wharf.
The large-mouthed, fish-eyed officer surveyed Ty from hat to spurs.
I've been meaning to ask, Lieutenant, who's this Texas pup? You find him hiding under a rain barrel in Garnetsville?
No, sir, Captain Bell. He found us. He claims he's Captain Matson's son.
Oh, hell shit, Sean. That's the biggest whopper I've ever heard. If Owen had any offspring, he wouldn't be drifting around the country unclaimed. Owen wouldn't abide it.
Well, Clute, we'll find out shortly one way or the other.
While Ty both wanted and dreaded the initial meeting of father and son, that meeting couldn't happen any too soon. The tight knot in his belly would gnaw at his shaky confidence until he learned how his father reacted to his sudden, unsolicited appearance.
Come along, lad. We'll squeeze past the troopers clogging the road and wait for General Morgan at the wharf.
Sean Shannon pulled Ty's Remington from his belt. The lieutenant rolled his fingers, reversing the pistol, and offered the weapon to Ty, but first.
No need for anyone to think you're a prisoner. Neither your own son or the gutsiest spy I've ever encountered.
Lieutenant Shannon dispatched a messenger to inform General Morgan as to status of the rear guard and stationed Ty and himself at the railing of the wharf, where they watched officers guide men and horses across the gangplanks of the two steamers for the balance of the afternoon. The scrawny, white-goateed private missing his teeth kept them from starving. He delivered a rasher of salt pork, pole bread, and a flask of brandy mixed with milk. Ty's glance hovered on the haggard soldier.
That's Private E.J. Pursley. Can't hit his own ass at close range with a pistol, but he can find victuals in the middle of Texas brush country.
At 5 o'clock in the evening, Ty was standing on the ground, leaning against Reb, half asleep.
The first brigade is on Indiana soil!
That meant the other half of General Morgan's command remained in Kentucky. The two steamboats initiated the ferrying of the 2nd Brigade. A cannon boomed, and all eyes swept upriver. The Springfield had returned with a 2nd federal gunboat. The troopers, waiting to board the Alice Dean, froze into stone, awaiting orders whether to continue loading or seek cover. One wrong move or word might well turn a controlled situation into absolute chaos.
Hold your ranks! Hold your ranks!
The waiting line of horse soldiers eased apart, creating an aisle for a captain mounted on a chestnut gelding with a blazed face and 4 white stockings.
Control your animals! Ignore the gunboats! Captain Byrd's artillery will deal with them!
The rider drew abreast of Ty and Lieutenant Shannon. He sat his horse with uncommon grace. Somehow he seemed familiar to Ty. The captain removed his hat and acknowledged the troopers. The exposed red hair, emerald green eyes, and white teeth visible when he smiled jolted the sleep from Ty and brought him up on his tiptoes. He was exactly as Boone Jordan had described him, right down to square shoulders and well, deep voice. He was staring at Captain Owen Matson, his father. Ty realized his father was staring back at him. He opened his mouth. Excitement had knotted his tongue, and he couldn't utter a sound. His father dismounted and led the chestnut onto the gangplank of the Alice Dean. Then he was gone, lost in the mass of horses crowding the steamship's stern.
You sure you're Owen's son? He didn't show any sign he recognized you.
I'm sure the last person he'd recognize is a man he's never met. Lieutenant, the only way you'll understand about Father and me is to hear me out.
Shannon smiled.
I bet it's a corker of a tale, and I've time to listen. Have at it, lad.
Ty decided the best place to start was by explaining his talk with Boone Jordan that had set him chasing after his father. The lieutenant was much more interested in what Ty had to say than the artillery duel between the Princeton, her cohort, and Captain Burns's howitzers, which ended with the Federal gunboats churning upriver into the dark night. By the time Ty finished, Lieutenant Shannon's head was shaking, not from doubt, but from wonderment.
Wildest story I ever heard. Your grandfather and your pa have to be the two most stubborn people from Kentucky ever. And that's a bunch of folks.
What do I do now?
You best stick with me. Owen and I are on detached duty with General Morgan's staff. We're the general's eyes and ears when his command's on the move or engaging the enemy. He can't always rely on his young messengers. I'll escort you to General Morgan's headquarters, wherever that might be tonight. Sooner or later, Owen will report to him. That suit you?
Yes, sir.
The ferriage of the 2nd Brigade lasted until midnight. Late in the evening, General Morgan and his personal entourage arrived at the Brandenburg Wharf. Messengers, dressed mainly in farm clothes, a few too young to shave, and one a mere stripling, all led their mounts aboard the John B. McCombs with the horse-handling skill of veteran cavalrymen. If there was a place for those puppies in Morgan's ranks, there had to be one for him, too. Black servants traveling on foot, wearing captured blue uniforms, carried items in hampers, baskets, and cloth bags. Apparently, General Morgan didn't completely forego the comforts of Hopemont, his Lexington home, while serving in the field. General Morgan drew rein on his handsome charger. Ty learned later the gelding was Glencoe, the general's favorite saddler. Lieutenant Shannon came to attention and saluted. Not being a trooper, Ty doffed his hat and stood ramrod straight. General Morgan returned the salute.
You still have your young charge in tow, Lieutenant. I believe that's a pistol hanging from his belt. You've confirmed his identity?
To my satisfaction, sir.
What about with Captain Matson? Has he been introduced to his mysterious son?
Not yet. I've learned the boy's story of how he got here. Owen's in for quite a surprise, sir.
Oh, yes, but isn't he now? I thank you, Lieutenant, for providing me a spot of humor in a long, long day. I'm pushing inland once I'm across the river, and we have ships to burn. Please remain with the rear guard and confirm their destruction to me personally. Captain Bell's in command.
Ty was initially appalled at the thought of burning the 2 steamboats. The flaking paint and dull varnish of the smaller Alice Dean's wheelhouse and superstructure revealed her age. On the other hand, by her spotless hull, polished woodwork, shiny brass fixtures, and powerful boiler, the larger John B. McCombs was a vessel that must have cost tens of thousands of dollars to build. To destroy either of them willfully seemed a terrible crime. But Ty wasn't naive. If the steamboats weren't destroyed, there would be no guarantee the pursuing Yankee cavalrymen wouldn't make use of them. As long as Union horsemen were stranded on the south bank of the Ohio, General Morgan's lead on them would increase by the hour, each hour gained being a decided advantage for his invading force. Lieutenant Shannon and Ty crossed the river on the final passage of the John B. McCombs. Reb took the boat ride like he was grazing on fresh grass. Ty was beginning to respect the gray's demeanor. While nothing disturbed him, cannon fire, the proximity of other horses in a crowded cargo bay, shadows in the night, Reb was alert and ready to respond to Ty's wishes at the slightest tug of his reins. A new development awaited them on the Indiana bank. Captain Clute Bell met them at the foot of the gangplank.
Been a change of plans, Sean. Captain Ballard is an old acquaintance of Colonel Duke's. On the strength of Ballard's promise to sail the McCombs upriver to keep the bluebellies from seizing it, General Morgan decided to spare his ship. Our orders to burn the Alice Dean stand.
A half hour of hard work freed the 2 packets of rebel horses, troopers, and equipment. The John B. McCombs departed for Louisville at full speed. The Alice Dean's layers of old paint and varnish erupted into flame at the touch of a match. Her superstructure virtually exploded when the fire reached her upper decks. In minutes, the packet boat was a great raging torch. The glare from the burning boat illuminated the Ohio for miles, turning night into day for those watching on the Indiana and Kentucky banks of the Ohio. Lieutenant Shannon was the first to hear the nasty whine of a bullet. Then rifle balls were zipping by.
It's the Bluebellies. They can see us from Brandenburg.
Mount up. We finished our business here.
Ty needed no additional urging to fly into Reb's saddle. They raced for the woods beyond the effective range of the sniping Bluebellies.
All right, we're out of their range.
Ty slowed Reb to a walk. The boat fire on the river was bright as lanterns amongst the covering trees. Lieutenant Shannon winked at Ty.
Something's wrong with your hat, lad.
Ty plucked his hat from his head. The brim was flat all the way around. The brass star, which had pinned up the right side, was missing. That soft plopping he'd heard was a bullet snipping the brass star from his hat, a mere 4 inches above his ear. His jaw quivering, Ty said nothing, but no matter how hard he gripped his saddle horn during their ride to General Morgan's headquarters, he couldn't keep his hands from trembling. Lieutenant Shannon noticed.
Welcome to the war, Mr. Ty Matson.
Bugles awakened Ty with the first trace of light in the eastern sky. He felt as if he hadn't slept a solitary wink. The sultry air of the barnyard smelled of horses and the smoke of cooking fires.
Come on, Matson, get up.
He rolled over and rubbed his eyes, lingering too long in his gum poncho single blanket bed to suit Private Pursley, who shook him with a knotty fist, though Ty was clearly awake. Ty gained his feet and found Lieutenant Shannon and 6 troopers watching him with bemused smiles. The slim trooper with the waxed mustache, which filled his nostrils and circled the corners of his mouth, smiled.
Sort of laggardly for Owen Matson's son, eh? More than likely, he's trainable, Callie. Ty, we arrived too late for introductions last night. Private Callie Smith here is from Georgetown. He was in the marble business with his father. The 2 hefty Jaspers that wear out horses are Privates Ad and Eb White. They're from the Tennessee border and are best known for the quality of their corn squeezins.
Each messmate nodded as he was introduced.
Corporal Sam Bryant, in the spotless uniform and ruffled shirt, owns a candy store with his family in Lexington. These 2 bashful Texans are Privates Given Campbell and Harlan Stillion. They followed me into this cussed fighting. They charge Bluebelly companies for the sheer hell of it. You already know Private Pursley. There may not be much of him, and he's old as dirt, but he's the finest camp cook in this here army.
What's in that skillet, EJ?
You're mighty lucky this morning, gents. Colonel Johnson foragers happened on a grist mill 5 miles east before daylight. The owner refused payment in Richmond greenbacks, so our boys burned his mill and helped themselves to 5 barrels of flour. And while a bunch of you sawed logs was eating, I raided that big chicken coop over behind the hay barn. So, you're about to enjoy E.J. Pursley's New Orleans Wake-A-Upper. Flour and eggs mixed with water and seasoned with salt and a dab of bacon fat. The Creole girls thought it was the hair of the dog after drinking too much champagne.
You gonna talk us to death or feed us, E.J.? He's right, E.J. If we don't hurry it up, we'll be short on time for saddling.
The messmates joshed and jabbered throughout their breakfast, eating from tin plates with twined forks. To Ty, they appeared a close-knit mess that avoided fussing with rank or authority when the occasion allowed. They would not readily accept strangers, but you were one of them once they invited you to join their mess, not because of an officer's order.
That a Remington pistol you're toting, lad? Like to have a look at it, if you don't mind.
Ty hesitated, not certain how best to refuse. He preferred not to be disrespectful to any trooper, regardless of rank, but he was not about to relinquish his revolver to someone who was not a superior officer, whom he'd met just 15 minutes ago, come what may. Ty's hesitation riled Callie, who was seated next to him and saw nothing wrong with what he thought was a harmless request spawned by his natural curiosity about firearms.
Pass it along, pup.
Callie thrust his hand toward Ty.
Well, I won't steal it for God's sake.
Almost before he realized what he was doing, Ty reached beneath his tin plate, grasped the butt of the Remington, yanked it from his holster, and cocked it as he aligned its sights with Callie Smith's chest.
Seems to me you've prodded a young rattlesnake mighty touchy about his pistol, Callie. Down Texas way, that can get a man killed right quick.
Callie leaned backward, glaring at Ty.
Ask yourself, Callie, would you have dared demand that of his father?
The anger ran out of Callie Smith fast as water thrown from a fire bucket. The marble merchant raised placating palms.
No offense intended. I was out of my pen.
Ty holstered the Remington and offered Callie Smith his hand.
No offense taken, Private Smith. I'm new to the cavalry. I have no real training, and I'm not always certain what's expected of me.
Ty and Callie shook hands and exchanged smiles. It was a satisfactory resolution to a minor set-to, one that could have resulted in bad feelings and grudges, the bane of the battlefield. Lieutenant Shannon glanced out the opening of the tent and then turned to his messmates.
After your plates, boys. By all that commotion at the farmhouse, General Morgan's about to make an appearance.
General John Hunt Morgan appeared fresh and rested despite the ordeal of his march across Kentucky. He spoke from the farm porch with an inclusive gaze filled with such personal warmth that each officer and trooper believed he was being talked to personally.
We are on Indiana soil at last, are we not?
Hats flew up from every corner of the barnyard. Positioned at General Morgan's side on the covered porch, Colonel Basil Duke and Adam Johnson, commanding officers of the 1st and 2nd Brigades, joined in with much verve.
All right now. We face a momentous task. Our orders will take us to the far corners of Ohio. The enemy will outnumber us 20-1. Telegraph lines stretching across the country in every direction will constantly report our movements. Railways will bring assailants against us from every quarter. We will have to run this gauntlet for 600 miles. It will be a long, hard, dangerous ride. But never forget for a moment that General Bragg is counting upon us. President Davis is counting upon us. The entire Confederacy is counting upon us. We must not fail. Defeat and disgrace are becoming to no man and to no country.
General Morgan flashed his famous smile. He nodded at Colonels Duke and Johnson.
To horse, gentlemen. The enemy expects us.
They expect you. Yes. Jeez Louise.
Let us not disappoint him.
The barnyard became a swarming beehive. Orders for the day were issued and mounted messengers hustled from camp to deliver them. Mess gear disappeared into storage trunks. Cooking fires were doused and canteens filled at the nearby creek. Horses were saddled and cinches double-checked. Firearms received a final inspection for clear barrels and proper charges.
Is your Remington revolver fully loaded, Ty?
Yes, sir, it is.
Take the cap from the ball beneath the hammer so that chamber can't fire by accident. When you're riding hard, you'd be surprised how easy it is to shoot yourself in the leg or kill a fine horse. I saw it happen, same as your father.
Lieutenant Shannon watched Ty remove the cap.
Did Boone Jordan supply you with extra cylinders?
Yes, sir. They're in my shoulder bag, but I haven't loaded them yet.
Load them with powder and ball, but not with caps. Capped cylinders bounce against each other in your bag, and they might fire off a round.
Ty absorbed Lieutenant Shannon's instructions with the concentration of a green recruit. Everything the lieutenant taught him diminished the chance he would embarrass his father. He finished loading the chambers of his spare cylinders with powder and ball, returned them to his shoulder bag, and hoped he wasn't being too forward.
Where's Captain Matson this morning, Lieutenant? He wasn't at General Morgan's headquarters, was he?
No, he's out front. He'll be where the next battle will be fought. That's his prime skill. Seeing the elephant close enough to look him straight in the eye is second nature to him.
The stripling messenger Ty had watched board the John B. McCombs ahead of General Morgan fetched Lieutenant Shannon his written orders for the day. The lieutenant read the single sheet of paper and motioned for his messmates to gather around Ty and himself.
We've been assigned to the 14th Kentucky Cavalry Advance Guard under the command of Colonel Richard Morgan, General Morgan's brother. Colonel Morgan will lead the advance. We're to join Quirk's scout company. Given in Harlan, you'll feel right at home with that bunch of rowdy roughnecks. Our next objective is Corydon, Indiana. Ty, you can ride with us if you prefer.
Ty didn't want to be detailed to the rear guard or another mundane function buried in the column. He'd already eaten enough dust for 3 lifetimes and gladly accepted the lieutenant's invitation.
Yes, sir.
The road to Corydon wound through alternating patches of ripening corn and woodland, road trees defining individual properties. Each farmhouse encountered was carefully scouted, though the occupants had fled in haste, leaving doors wide open. With the locals aware of the horse-stealing talents of the raiders, good horses were scarce in number. Nags were plentiful. Ty found the dust from trailing after 30 horses versus 2,000 was child's play. His thighs and buttocks still ached, but much less after just a few hours out of the saddle. He was certain the pain would return as the day advanced and his raw blisters burst anew.
They learn we're coming by saddle, they'll telegraph and run for the nearest cave or town. Mean and decrepit as we appear, I believe I'd be right on their heels. I was in their shoes.
Ty, whenever we meet the enemy, you're to remain in the rear, and I mean what I say. I don't want you wrapped in a burying blanket when your father comes calling. Understood?
Ty nodded.
Is your horse gun broke?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever fired a revolver from the saddle of a horse?
No, sir.
On the outside chance you might find yourself in a skirmish with the Bluebellies or their home guard militia, shoot from a standing horse is the same as target practice on the ground with your arm fully extended. From a running horse, you rise slightly in the stirrups for better balance with your arm half extended, body turned toward the target. Again, whether at a trot or a gallop, shoot with your arm half extended and body turned toward the target. And always remember there's a horse under you. Many a green trooper gets excited in battle and shoots his own horse in the head. There won't be time for any serious field training, fast as we'll be moving day and night. I'll stick to what will keep you alive, the same as Owen would.
The terrain gradually melded into rolling hills overshot with ravines and abrupt changes in elevation. Every sharp rise of ground or hairpin turn in the road was a mystery as to whether the enemy lurked ahead. With church bells in Corydon pealing a warning to the local populace, the scout company finished climbing a low hill about 2 miles short of the city. At the bottom of the hill, a patrol of home guards in slouch hats and cotton frock coats reined their horses about and spurred madly to the north. A half-mile ahead of them, a solid barricade of logs, wormwood fence rails, and rocks festooned with gun barrels on the far side blocked the road. The first sign of organized resistance in Indiana. Lieutenant Shannon and Ty rode forward alongside Colonel Richard Morgan.
Colonel, this young man has remarkable eyesight. Ty, who's manning that barricade?
Ty took his time, wanting to ensure the information he passed to Colonel Morgan was accurate.
There are about 400 of them, which I can see. They're mostly militia in field clothes and mechanics' overalls, armed with squirrel guns, muskets, and an ancient-looking blunderbuss.
That's the most succinct observation I've ever heard from a scout without a telescope. Who is this young man, Lieutenant?
His name is Ty Matson, sir.
Oh, Captain Owen Matson's mysterious unclaimed son, huh? General Morgan mentioned his presence at our morning staff meeting. Staff officers are betting each other on what will happen when the two meet each other.
Captain Thomas Hines, one of Quirk's scouts, reported for orders.
They're untrained militia. We'll notify Colonel Johnson's 2nd Brigade and call for support if needed. The speed of foot of retreating home guards is legendary. They've never held against us. Prepare to charge, Captain Hines.
Yes, sir, Colonel.
Quirk's scouts, followed by the 14th Kentucky, 87 total troopers, descended the hill in ranks of 4 at a trot. At the bottom, they fanned out with the widening of the road and spilled over into the planted fields bordering its hard surface, forming a line 40 yards wide and 3 troopers deep, corn stalks slapping against the chests of the trotting horses.
Buglers, blow charge!
This fateful command unraveled the peaceful, hot, sun-bright morning with brain-numbing speed. Ty was in the extreme rear, per Lieutenant Shannon's orders, with every honest intention of remaining there. He was standing in the stirrups for a better view of the barricaded militia when bugles echoed in the valley. The front line of troopers broke into a gallop and Reb lunged ahead without any warning.
Whoa!
Nearly unseated, he grasped the saddle horn with both hands, giving Reb a free rein. In 5 strides, the gray gelding was running at a full gallop, and Ty was charging the enemy, orders be damned. He saw it on the reins, but Reb had the bit in his teeth, determined to catch his hoofed cohorts. Ty's initial fear ebbed, and he carefully drew his Remington, fingers locked on its walnut grips. Clods of dirt torn loose by the racing animals in front of him peppered his face and eyes. And he dropped his head beside Reb's neck. Under the same earthen assault, Reb didn't falter. Boone Jordan hadn't told Ty about Reb's whole history, but the horse surely had been a cavalry mount in the past. Ty was suddenly spurring Reb, completely immersed in a reckless, dangerous, and spontaneous undertaking that might cost him his life. Ty drew breath into lungs starved by excitement and joined them. Lancing flame erupted the length of the barricade blocking the road. Wisely, the home guard had waited until the onrushing enemy was virtually in their laps before firing their first volley. At close range, the barricade seemed too high for a jumping horse to clear, but not a single raider tugged on his reins. Ty watched leaping horses fall short, smash into the breastworks, and slew sideways in a mass of thrashing hooves and flailing human arms and legs. Other horses cleared the barricade without difficulty, their riders firing downward at defiant militia while in the air. Ty sensed Reb gathering his legs beneath him. Then the big gray soared upward. He leaned forward, too busy maintaining his seat in the saddle to search for targets beneath the gray's belly. Reb's rear hoof clipped the top rail of the barricade. They landed with Ty still in the saddle and galloped onward through terrified home guards desperate to avoid Reb's iron shoes. The scurrying crowd bumped into each other, and the gathering crush of bodies slowed Reb to a walk. Fingers trying to drag Ty from the saddle clutched his sleeves and pants legs. Realizing he would quickly be overwhelmed on the ground, Ty fired a bullet into the crowd and wheeled Reb on his rear legs, scattering home guards like windblown leaves. A cold black gelding cut in front of Reb, his rider's huge 9-round Lamar pistols shooting left and right simultaneously.
They're blowing recall! Follow me!
The killing whirlwind on horseback cleaved a clear path to the home guard barricade. Ty was so anxious to escape capture, he even forgot his Remington contained 4 live rounds. There was no hoof clipping of the top rail this jump. Hunched low in the saddle to present the smallest possible target, Ty and Sean Shannon maintained a full gallop until they were beyond rifle range. Now that the excitement and uproar had ended, the danger was past, and they were safe. Ty was shaking all over. Lieutenant Shannon grinned.
Well, lad, you've looked the elephant in the eye. Right big, ain't he?
Ty's adventures wielding a pistol were finished for the day. At Lieutenant Shannon's suggestion, an intrigued General Morgan agreed to Ty serving as his eyes from the low hill overlooking the battlefield. Ty had stopped shaking from his close brush with death and looked forward without any qualms to watching the conclusion of the battle from safer ground. General Morgan arrived and agreed with Colonel Johnson of the 2nd Brigade that the Corydon breastworks were too high and too well defended for mounted cavalry to breach. The resulting strategy was the encirclement of both flanks of the barricade, while an on-foot frontal assault supported by 2 howitzers occupied its defenders. The Home Guard center repulsed 2 charges by dismounted raiders before they wilted under heavy cannon and small arms fire, and their flanks collapsed. Realizing their situation was hopeless, the Green Militia enlistees panicked and fled. The subduing of Corydon proved a minor affair.
Alright, guys. I can't believe how long this is taking. But when I get this last thing done, I'm going to be done.
Ty's adventures wielding a pistol were finished for the day. At Lieutenant Shannon's suggestion, an intrigued General Morgan agreed to Ty serving as his eyes from the low hill overlooking the battlefield. Ty had stopped shaking from his close brush with death and looked forward without any qualms to watching the conclusion of the battle from safer ground. General Morgan arrived and agreed with Colonel Johnson of the 2nd Brigade that the Corydon breastworks were too high and too well defended for mounted cavalry to breach. The resulting strategy was the encirclement of both flanks of the barricade, while an on-foot frontal assault supported by 2 howitzers occupied its defenders. The Home Guard center repulsed 2 charges by dismounted raiders before they wilted under heavy cannon and small arms fire, and their flanks collapsed. Realizing their situation was hopeless, the Green Militia enlistees panicked and fled. The subduing of Corydon proved a minor affair. With the field secured, the Parrott gun battery was established within easy range of the town. 2 shells were fired. One was a dud. Ty saw the second explode in the center of the town's main street. He didn't discern any real damage for General Morgan, but the single explosion was sufficient. Colonel Lewis Jordan of the Indiana Legion hoisted a white flag and surrendered the town. The first public building spotted by the raiders, a small Presbyterian church, was converted to a field hospital for the wounded. The Confederate dead were placed beneath white sheets in the church's fenced yard. Prisoners being excess baggage for Morgan's rapidly invading command, Home Guard captives were herded into lines at the limestone courthouse for paroling without arms.
What do you think you're doing? You can't do that.
Shouts of indignation on the part of Corydon citizens attracted Ty's attention. Raiders were helping themselves to horses and emerging from retail establishments carrying pants, shirts, boots, and hats by the armfuls, with the complaining sellers dogging their heels. 4 Indiana merchants stepped in front of Glencoe and confronted General Morgan. A florid-faced older male in a black suit, starched snow-white shirt, and red string tie spoke for the 4 of them.
By what right do your men take what they want and offer worthless Richmond greenbacks or no payment at all in return?
General Morgan stood in his stirrups and pointed to the hundreds of troopers occupying the town's entire center.
They, sir, are my authority. And what might your name be, sir?
Uriah Hagee, sir.
What's your position in this community, Mr. Hagee?
I'm Corydon's sole banker.
How fortunate, Mr. Hagee. You are the proper person to carry our demand to your fellow businessmen. My scouts reported there are 3 grist mills in the Corydon area. It is 1 o'clock by your courthouse clock. The ransom for each mill is $1,000 to be paid by 2 o'clock. If the monies aren't forthcoming to the minute, we will burn the mills. Understood?
But those mills are no threat to you or your men.
Banker Hagee, Northerners have enjoyed a full belly and a full larder far from the fighting. But the bloom is off the stem. Henceforth, we will provision ourselves from your rich land. Every horse, mill, bridge, trestle, depot, telegraph wire, federal greenback, morsel of food, and ton of forage are now fair game. We will allow you to experience, as we Southerners have, the harsh bite and deprivation of conflict.
Peering about, General Morgan located his adjutant.
Lieutenant Hardesty, where are we dining?
The Eagle Hotel, sir. First-class fare, according to the locals.
Morgan focused an icy glare on the Corydon merchants.
That's where you may bring the ransom. 1 hour, gentlemen. 1 hour.
His casual, dismissing wave infuriated Uriah Hagee.
You heard him. Come on.
The banker shooed his companions toward a brick bank building across the crowded street. With no specific orders, Ty reined Reb behind Glencoe and Lieutenant Shannon's black gelding. The gist of the general's lecturing of the Corydon citizenry stuck in Ty's craw, for it declared a major shift in tactics for his raiders. Ty was better educated than some of General Morgan's officers. Ty's grandfather, Enoch Matson, had an extensive library, and the Cincinnati, Louisville, and Lexington newspapers were delivered weekly to the grandfather's home. Enoch had insisted that Ty read and digest the paper's contents and be prepared to discuss them at dinner and in the evening hours before bed. With the advent of the conflicts between North and South, the war became a daily topic for the grandfather and grandson. Ty learned early on that Enoch Matson believed guerrilla warfare behind established lines of defense was an abomination and violation of the proper conduct of war. To him, General John Hunt Morgan and his raiders were loathsome. They were an affront to decency, deserving nothing but the lynching rope. And yet Ty admired the exciting and daring General Morgan. He could hardly wait for the details of Morgan's latest venture behind enemy lines. Ty didn't dare attempt to sway Enoch's opinion whatsoever when he read to him how Morgan's troopers respected civil property and didn't resort to horse stealing or general thievery. They destroyed warehouses containing military stores, depots, telegraph poles, railroad trestles, tore up iron rails, and misdirected troop trains with fake telegraphic messages. Military tactics designed to disrupt the Union's means of communication, reinforcement, transportation, and supply. Unless they armed themselves and joined the Home Guards or local militia and stepped into General Morgan's path, civilians were in little danger of harm. But as Ty had heard just minutes ago, those tactics had undergone a major transformation with the raiders' crossing of the Ohio River into Indiana. Horse thievery, ransom for money, looting, and mill burning were now permissible with the blessing of General John Hunt Morgan himself. Much as Ty wanted to succeed as a soldier and not embarrass his father, the thought of what was in store for the peaceful countryside of Indiana and Ohio made him shudder. American Civil War I, Raiding with Morgan, is continued on the next CD.
Alright guys, that'll wrap it up for today. And that's all for today. And I got something to show you guys. Some things that veteran actually has made. Well, one thing he has made, and one thing I have made, two things I found, and two couple of things that other things that different people have made. So, as you can see, there's a gizzard stone, and this is pretty old. This is when the dinosaurs were roaming around. And we got this, a Gerard's bite thing, got fossilized at the same time as that did. That's the same age, I think. This is a pot that I have made. Pretty much the same design. And that's a peacock. And it is inside. Here's another thing that someone else has made. There's inside. Yeah. Can I see? Here's a mud pot. Really fancy. Let me take out the jar part. Good start. And this is what the veteran has made for his boys. A German gun. I can't remember, but if you guys know what it is, put it in the comment section. And the next CD will be done until tomorrow at 10. Alright guys, well, that wraps it up for today. How do you turn this off? Oh, I got one other thing that I do. Wait, I through the end of my videos. One reason why I do that is for wounded veterans and veterans that came home from war and they're not injured or anything. And soldiers that are serving today. And I don't care what place you're in. You can be a simple truck driver. Like the guy who made this. He was a tanker. And he had gas. And, you know, like the terrorists and that. Those idiots that we dropped them all above. What's an idiot? So idiots. So, you can be special forces, or anyone, I don't care. But I thank you. Wait, forgot to swoop. Thank you. How do you swoop? I'm going to swoop. Thank you for your service, and have a nice, wonderful day, guys. Enjoy.